Welcome to the Cannacurio podcast, powered by Cannabis Media. I'm your host, Ed Keating, and today I'm joined by Ben Walters, founder of Pioneer Intelligence. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ed. It's great to be with you.
So I'd like to hear more of the creation story of Pioneer. How did it come to be, and why did you do it?
Yeah. So I am, again, thanks for having me on. It's cool to be with you. My professional career has had a variety of different chapters to it. I started in the world of commodities many moons ago. I did that for 7 years. The first 3 here in the East Coast of the US, and then the last 4 in China. I moved to Shanghai at the end of 2003, expressly for this commodities business. Found a bit of success in mainland China, but more opportunity across the Asia Pacific region, and decided that was a place that I wanted to spend some time, but also recognized that commodities was not what I was put on the planet to do. So, I used to come home at night and bang my head against the wall on how you differentiate yourself, and actually took a couple cracks at trying to make that business something more than it was. And at the end of the day, I made the determination that I wanted to go in another direction. And so I had this idea of an original brand concept, and that became very appealing to me. This idea of if you're trying to sell something that everybody else was selling, let's go the opposite direction and create something totally original. And so I had a company called Ozpop that I started in 2007. I think we did specialty footwear, really footwear shoes, not too dissimilar from Chuck Taylor's, a canvas vulcanized shoe, and made some accessories. And that was a 7-year journey. The first 3 years far exceeded expectations in terms of what I thought was possible, almost by any measure. I had a lot of fun and really enjoyed the idea of building a brand and doing the blocking and tackling on a shoestring. Some pricey mistakes in year 3, and sinking too much capital into inventory sort of was my undoing. But at the end of the day, I did finally exit that business, and that opened up a door for me at Beats by Dre. And so this was the Beats brand just prior to the Apple acquisition. And the brand and a lot of smart people had done a lot of work in the Asia market. My focus was really on China. Had done a lot of really good work in constructing a sales architecture and distribution, but the brand was leveraging communications that were, developed and marketing assets developed in Culver City, California. And so our remit was, okay, let's get local, because as much as the value proposition of Beats had and probably still continues to develop, it's a lifestyle brand. And so communicating in local language through local communications channels using local ambassadors is key. And so we did that. And when we finally got that up and running and turned on the light switch, it was pretty amazing that the business really did hockey stick. And again, a lot of people did a lot of work for us to sort of go in there in that glory moment and enjoy. But amongst our mandate was not only obviously to grow revenues, but being a lifestyle brand was to build what they call Beats Army, with this like impassioned group of brand loyalists who were going to engage with the content. And when we started to do this in China, the people came and they came in huge numbers. And so that was really my first exposure to big marketing data, right? This is an endless supply.
Okay. Yeah, right.
People with a very still sort of green systems, whereby, okay, let's bucket these people and figure out, how to organize them, and then continue to connect with them and back into sort of reconversion process and sort of get that funnel going. And so I took to the numbers, and I really enjoyed it. And again, a lot of people were involved in it, but we had really good success with it. And so I had spent 13 years in Shanghai, all of them almost every day an amazing one, but realized that was not a place where I wanted to grow old. And so I repatriated back. And when I came back to the States, I had a consulting gig in the cannabis industry. I've been a cannabis consumer since my late teen years, and always very interested in sort of nascent markets. And so I jumped at the opportunity there. And alongside that project, I started to collect data on consumer-facing brands in the space without really a clear idea of what I would do with that data set, but that perhaps me or the organization that I was working with, we could learn things through the data that would give us a leg up in understanding that sort of brand consumer relationship before reading about it in another publication or through some other brand's press release.
Interesting. So there was, finally data for you to sort of grab onto in this cannabis space, which, some argue is a commodity and others argue is sort of very brand rich. And I think, we could probably do a whole podcast just on that. So what kind of data did you gather, Ben? And, how did you put it together?
So at that point, when I first started to collect the data set looked in its structure similar to what we do now. That data set grew in breadth and depth, but focusing in three areas: social media, online news media, and web-related activities. And so the data is all ethically sourced data that we were collecting. We had our own API plugin into Meta, which was, again, back at that time, it was still Facebook, Instagram. And we work with a company called Meltwater and have for a long time on online news. They have this monster pipe, I think the biggest pipe in the industry, and use some fairly sophisticated Boolean strings to make sure that we're attributing brand mention in online news into the right bucket. And then web activities, looking at traffic related metrics, so UVs, visits, time on site, bounce rate, pages per visit, and then some back end stuff as well related to sort of on page and off page SEO, keywords and the like, and backlinks. So that's some of the
and I think back to, over the last couple of years, as you and I have gotten to get to know each other, I think you've shared examples with me where some brands would suddenly see a rush of, let's say, new social media interactions, and then you're able to pretty much deduce over time that company just bought a bunch of followers because the engagement dropped off, the number of followers dropped. I mean, is that the kind of blocking and tackling that you have to do with this data to, help your customers understand some of these blips or trends that they see that, may be easily explained away?
Yeah, we're in the position to look at it at a macro level and then get super granular, super fast. And we have some proprietary tools that let us go see when the needle actually moves, and then go back and look at the content and see what's happening there. And our systems can also detect whether or not that's organic in nature or manipulated. And yeah, I think by and large, the manipulated is probably purchase of followers. But there's other things, brands often do sweepstakes activities, and there's nothing wrong with that. Hopefully you execute where it's sort of done in an on-brand manner, but that's a way where you're going to see spikes in user growth and engagement, and those will tail off. But generally speaking, if you're doing a well-executed sweepstakes campaign, the fall off is not going to be so severe, and that's a way to effectively build your audience. Whereas there are brands that go out and purchase thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of fans or followers, and then you see that decay each and every week continually.
So some of these strategies remind me of sort of consumer packaged goods kind of data and information. I used to work for somebody who came out of, craft foods, and she really knew this space well. Even though we're in publishing, there was some of that came to us, as learnings. So like coupon drops and things like that, they're going to make changes. So that leads me to, think to your customers, which is, who uses these insights that you create, and what decisions are you helping your customers make? Is it like competitive intelligence, like, oh, Ed's company just did a big coupon thing, that's why they've moved? Like, what are people doing, and how do they ingest these insights that Pioneer creates?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're still learning that, which is great. Obviously, I think so many people are in the same boat, right? Without a doubt, there's utility in our intelligence for brand operators, retailers, both dispensary and delivery, the investor community, and then other marketing service providers. I think there are other groups, verticals inside the space and adjacent that can also find utility, but let's focus on those first four. And if we look mostly at brand operators, right? I came to Pioneer as a brand operator. That's sort of how I built it. Lots of utility there. I'll give you a few. So internally, right? the intel that we derive can be used to measure campaigns. So a campaign can be anything from event sponsorship, launching into a new product territory, updating your website, paying a group of influencers to do something like that, right? As a means to measure some sort of campaign or activity. Measuring personnel performance, in-house or external, freelancers or agencies, is another good use for it. And then for larger organizations where you've got a cultivation department and maybe a finance department and sales, it's another means for marketing to be able to present in an all hands meeting or something like that. This is what we're doing in marketing, and this is how we're helping to sort of move the needle for them. So those are some internal uses.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question because you talked about sort of like if an event occurs and what might the impact of that be. So does that mean that there is some almost like geofencing impact that you can measure, or you can say, well, in the Connecticut market, this happened, or is it not quite that refined yet?
We can do, that's not built into our scoring system at this point. But with a little bit of manual work, we can make certain assessments on the localization, particularly around online news, right? Because there, if you do a review of it, you can see where if you're getting into local and regional publishers, how that's helping to bump up an online. And yeah, you can also do that with decent levels of accuracy around web activities. We're not at the point where we're doing all that much on social. But yeah, and the idea is, right, so you have a sort of baseline of where you were at before a given activity started, you know where you sit, and then where does it spike up to at the height of that activity or the height of the influence of that activity? And then if you naturally would go back down, are you above where you were at the beginning?
Yeah, exactly. So is it accretive or not? So I think we focused a lot on the internal users and benefits. Is a flip side? Is there an external user kind of, or more of an observer, investor?
I think it's just sticking with the brand operator. Two big external use cases for the product. One is as a tool for your wholesale department, right? So if you're a brand that enjoys awareness and engagement, you can bring that into target dispensaries where you want to get in the door, or if you're already in the door and you want to get better shelf space, to talk through this idea of our brand is enjoying increased awareness and engagement. So obviously buyers would be interested to know that when they're making their purchasing and then merchandising decisions, and also for co-marketing opportunities, right? For a big brand can go into a smaller retailer and potentially leverage their awareness as a means to negotiate a better deal with a smaller dispensary, because they can maybe help elevate the awareness for that smaller dispensary.
Excellent.
So yeah.
I was going to move on. I'm curious, just sort of from a numbers perspective, how many brands are you covering now? And what does it take for a brand to get on your radar screen? Because I imagine that there's a lot of brand proliferation, but I don't know if that's true. That's sort of my biasing in the hypothesis. But so how many are on the radar screen, and how do they get there?
Sure. So there are a lot of brands in cannabis, some may say, and particularly in certain territories where there are too many. As of last week, we activate about every 2 months, we activate brands from our pipeline into our active brand pool. Brands will sit in our pipeline for 6 months. The reason being, for almost all the metrics that we look at, we do include, we look at absolute position and then change in period. So to get a quarter over quarter measure, we need 26 weeks of data. So a brand will sit in our pipeline for 26 weeks before we move them to an active brand pool. And I would say this year, every 2 months, we've been adding another 25 brands to the active brand pool. We're now at 705, I think, as of last week. And then the other question about how a brand gets in, it's a really organic process and just sort of happens naturally. There's no prerequisites to getting involved. If you're a licensed seller of THC, if you're a THC wholesale product, we'd love to have you. And so we publish the brands that are in our active brand pool and in the pipeline on our website. And so for anyone out there who's looking at this, if your brand that you work at or you love is not on our radar, by all means hit us up and we'll be happy to add them.
Excellent. So, one of the things I was thinking was, is there a minimum requirement for a brand? Like, how many geographies does it need to be in, or sales, social media, cloud? Like, I guess, which factors have perhaps the most valence, so that they can break through that organic process to be like, pick me, and I'm going to be in the brand pool.
No, I think to our mind is like if you're actively branding, right? If the team stumbles upon a brand that we hadn't heard about that's actually been around for a little bit, but their last social media post was from November, and when you go to their website, it's showing a copyright date of 2020. We're not running to include them. But for brands that are in the moment and of the moment when we're reading about them and go see them, if they're actively marketing, yeah, we'd be happy to add them to the mix.
Excellent. So, not all brands are created equal, and brands. There are different types of brands that are out there. Some are tied to celebrities. Some are owned by MSOs. I know last year we did some brand research just to try and get an understanding of which brands were carried across some of the major MSOs, and it was kind of hard to dig into that data. There's also craft brands. So I'm curious, from where you sit now with all this data that you've been ingesting and observing, what is your take on these in terms of the celebrity brand, MSOs, and these different, if you will, flavors of brands or types of brands? Which ones do you think are most impactful, and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think if we're going to focus on, let's say, celebrity, MSO, and craft, there's for sure room for all three in our industry, and I'm sure that all three will be a part of it going forward. I think so. If we're going to talk about celebrity brands, right? I think celebrity brands or celebrity affiliations, I guess I should say, make a lot of sense. First of all, our culture is obviously celebrity obsessed or celebrity focused. So there's that. But the other thing is that cannabis marketers face a huge number of obstacles in terms of what you can and can't do from a regulatory perspective on marketing and communications. And so leveraging the celebrity names as a means to sort of get your brand name out there or communicate a particular product launch or initiative makes a ton of sense. Um, there are a lot of celebrity brands, and some of them are doing the celebrity affiliation thing quite well, and maybe others a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more head scratching. But from if we're going to dive into it, I would think celebrity brands, we could bucket them thinking about sort of ambassador teams is one approach. A group out in Oregon started doing that years ago called Oregrown, and they did it, I think, reasonably effectively many moons ago. Claiborne is a group that's doing it, and they're leveraging different types of athletes from rodeo riders, BMX, motocross, and so using ambassadors to do it. And even Trulieve last month or 2 months ago used Ethan Zahn, who was one of the first winners of Survivor, quite effectively because he ran the Boston Marathon and was talking about use of their product. And they have recently come to the Massachusetts market. So that was quite an effective use in terms of ambassadors. Cannes has done a really good job. We're talking about building an investor roster, and so that they can use Gwyneth Paltrow, Rosario Dawson, Baron Davis, and the list goes on of people who I don't think appear in any of, or don't necessarily appear in any outward communications, but are using their voice or their soapbox as a means to further the Cannes name. Line extensions is another celebrity affiliation that can be really effective. Viola did one earlier this year with Allen Iverson, which I think was super effective. AI still has a lot of clout in a lot of places in culture. Jeter, the brand, the pre-roll brand out of California, did one with Dwayne Wade. So those line extensions can be quite effective. And then you have the celebrity face brands, right, where the celebrity in him or herself becomes the face of the brand. Bella Thorne has one with Forbidden Flowers. Seth Rogen and his brand Houseplant, they seem to be doing a lot of things really right when it comes to brand development. Whereas, yes, you know that it's Seth Rogen, but you don't see his face or read his name when you go to their website till way down on the page. And they've actually come up with an original brand position that's not reliant upon Seth Rogen, but doing something totally different with neatly designed houseware, accessories, lamps, cups, and the like, and then good quality cannabis to go alongside of that. It's really quite interesting.
So how, I mean, this is sort of gets to the heart of things. How much do you think that matters to the average consumer? Because the thing that I'm trying to wrap my head around, and we talked about earlier, is unless that brand is available in your state and you're a consumer, you're not going to have access to it. Plus, there's no real national advertising platform yet for this. So I'm curious, to get your thoughts as to, how does this move the needle? Like, does this work really well in California or in these markets that have been around for a long time? Whereas on the East Coast, it's mostly MSOs because it came out of a medical market model and the brands aren't quite as established. So, I guess the question is, do consumers care? And does that show up, let's say, in perhaps sales, if you could even go, extend that far out?
I think there's a few things to unpack there. Market maturity being one, and then the nature of the licensing within a state and the competitive nature. There are some states that have growing cannabis consumption where the licenses are still held pretty tightly, and so brands don't really need to do all that much.
Right.
The question I think at the top was, does it matter for consumers? I also think that brands may the consumer, but as a means to raise awareness with prospective dispensary clients or investors or the like. I'm sorry if I lost track on your question.
No, that's all right. I was just trying to figure out, for the average consumer, is it something that really affects their purchasing behavior? Because some of these brands are not available in all 39 markets that are medical and or adult. So I was just kind of curious, how much that really plays out in terms of, let's say, increased sales.
Right. I think it's a great question. Brand loyalty, I think, it's an even bigger question, right? Even in places where, forgetting about it at a national level, but people who are going to go in and buy a particular product in a given market, even if that product is readily available each and every day, is another question. I think it's an interesting question. I think most brands aspire for growth, and so as a means to raise awareness, again, leveraging celebrity influence is a way to raise awareness for your own brand, whether your aspirations are big or gargantuan, and if you're only in a couple states or you have a national footprint. I still think that there's a case to be made that an effective celebrity strategy can be beneficial. And again, it also comes down to what the nature of that business arrangement is.
Yep. No, that makes good sense. And you're right. I mean, a celebrity does cut across the sovereign nations that all these states have turned into with their own rules and regulations. And if that Mike Tyson is doing something, or Snoop Dogg or whoever, that's probably going to break through, at least in some way. Focusing a little bit more on your business, Ben, of Pioneer, I'm curious, how do you find customers? How do they find you?
We've been quite successful in terms of our own top of funnel activities, in so much as we've got a really nice subscriber list, and being able to see who's opening up the emails that we send out on a monthly basis. And I'm not afraid to hit someone up from our email list who I know is regularly reading our newsletter and interest in it. Yeah, I think that's our primary way, is using our email subscription as a means to bring people in, and then leveraging it from there.
Excellent. Yeah, I know. And your newsletters are certainly insightful. And as you look across those people who do subscribe and moving toward paying customers, do they tend to come from MSOs, mom and pops, vendors, brand companies themselves? I mean, because they certainly exist. I mean, who fits into that bucket of customer for Pioneer?
Yeah, we've done some work with agencies, and they're using our tool and reporting as a means to demonstrate their performance back to their brand clients. And that's another area where I'm super bullish on, and hope we can expand that segment of our business. Most of the business right now is brand operators, and it's really neat. I think we have certain brand operator clients that are quite sophisticated sophisticated marketers and they're using some of the same tools that we are. But the fact that we're bringing in this benchmarking capability, whereas if they're looking at a given tool, they can see what their own performance is and perhaps a couple other select brands to compare against, but we're going to show them their performance against the industry at large. And so those are sophisticated folks, and they really just use our reporting. On the other hand, we work with some other less sophisticated operators, and they come to us for strategic guidance alongside of the reporting. So we help them develop strategy based on sort of the data-backed intel that we can present to them.
Yeah, makes sense. And just speaking from a cannabis media standpoint, I would be the first one to say there's a lot of power in aggregation, because that's what we do. I mean, we go to all the states, we get as much information as we can, we add to it, et cetera, so that somebody can get a perspective that they're not going to get on their own unless they choose to go visit 150 regulators every month and month after month after month. And we haven't found anybody who wants to do that. So that's kind of a good thing. Now, any challenges that Pioneer is contending with, or things that are, making you scratch your head or keep you up at night?
I mean, shortening the sales cycle, but that's probably the same with everybody who's watching listening to the podcast. Our industry right now is obviously faced with a lot of challenges, and capital is not as loose and easy as it once was. Right. And so finding the right people where we can really demonstrate that we can drive effective value, and moving from that sort of nice to have to need to have is a challenge that I'm still trying to crack every single day.
Yeah, excellent. No, great point. And then finally, the question we always like to ask, looking forward, what trends are you keeping tabs on? What should we be looking for if we're interested in understanding what's going on in this brand space that you've already got your finger on the pulse?
Yeah, I mean, from the brand space, starting from a marketing space, I do think it will be interesting, as you used to talk about sort of benchmarking marketing performance around web activities. We are moving to eventually we'll be in a sort of a cookie-free world, and that will have implications significant in how you measure different metrics that factor into what Pioneer is doing today. And then from the brand space, yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. There were some quality brands that came out of the West that were doing a lot of things right, that were very early. Without going down the rabbit hole of investor and sort of valuations, but maybe that market hasn't developed as quickly as they want, and then trying to figure out what their strategies are to take those brands and help them expand into new markets. I think that will be a really interesting story. More significantly, though, is I think whereas our industry has been very West Coast and Western states focused, there are real brands that are being developed in newer, less mature markets that are coming, and they're probably learning, from hopefully some of the stuff that maybe Pioneer is sharing with them, but learning from the development that's happened before them. So there are real players in Massachusetts and in Michigan and a handful of other newer markets that are going to be real brands 5 years from now, and I imagine we'll have some presence back in the more mature markets on the West Coast.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you bring up an interesting point. One of the things that we've been doing with our products, and I think you do the same, is sort of coming up with the leaderboards, who's leading, and people love to see that and compare. And the longer you build out your data, the richer that gets, and the more sort of fundamental the insights you can provide, because it's really built on a stable foundation. So I think it's very exciting what you guys are doing, and thanks for joining us today, Ben. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners did too.
Awesome, thank you, and I had a good time being with you.